Before we begin, may I make appearances before the court?
Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Jay Harris, and along with my co-counsel Christopher Grant
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
and Lori Easton, we represent the state in this matter. And we have some documents to send to the bench. It is the available case law, Midland's Penal Code, the Midland's Rules of Evidence, jury instructions, the stipulations, orders and motions in limine, and special instructions. Permission to approach opposing counsel and tender to the bench.
Yes.
Seeing as though this is the first time in your courtroom, what is your purposes about moving about the will?
Free movement during opening statements and closing arguments. I'll give you some discretion during your direct examination, but please ask permission before approaching opposing counsel or opposing counsel's witness.
And would you like us to ask permission to approach the bench as well?
Yes.
With that, Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed.
Okay. Any matters from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. First, we would like to make appearances for the record.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaylee Erickson, and along with my co-counsel, Allison Hilmer. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good
And
afternoon.
Bailey Hewsung. Good afternoon, Your Honor. We represent the defendant in today's case, Mr. Avery Bancroft.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bancroft.
Now, Your Honor, at this time, we would also like to ask that all arguments are heard constructively at sidebar so that the jury is not aware of our objections and arguments.
Of course.
And at this time, we would also like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. Our party representative in today's case is Mr. Avery Bancroft.
And do you have a party representative for today's case?
Yes, Your Honor, our party representative will be Nikki Cannon.
All right. Then good afternoon. All witnesses shall be constructively sequestered with the exception of the party. The parties. So go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Please do the prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed? May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Today, we are going to hear a story about the owner of the Black Bear Casino, Avery Bancroft. Avery Bancroft is a man who bribed a member of the Midlands Gambling Commission, Chase Covington, in order to secure Covington's vote for Bancroft's proposal. When the Midlands Gambling Commission announced that they were ready to seek proposals in order to issue a new casino license in the state of Midlands, Bancroft jumped at this opportunity and saw it as an opportunity to expand his empire and would stop at nothing to do so, including breaking the law. Bancroft has already admitted in his interrogation that he bribed a member of the Midlands Gambling Commission, giving him money in exchange for Covington's vote for his proposal when they were issuing a new casino license. Now the case that we have here in this courtroom today is a case of Bancroft, who committed a crime and is now looking to point the finger at undercover detective Mickey Keenan and chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission Chase Covington in order to escape the consequence of his crime. Bancroft's theory is that undercover detective Mickey Keenan and chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission Chase Covington forced him to make a bribe to Covington. This theory is an absolute converse of what really took place. In actuality, Bancroft had sufficient motive to initiate this bribe. Bancroft wanted to make a power move to become the only casino owner in Midlands to have 2 casino licenses and 2 casinos. He enlisted in the help of Chase Covington and gave him a very lucrative cash offer in exchange for Covington's vote for his proposal. Avery Bancroft made this bribe to Chase Covington out of his own free will, and he openly admits that he gave a government official money in order to further his own self-interest. Avery Bancroft sees no way in bribing government officials and has no remorse for doing so. No one forced his hand. We as the prosecution have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt that Avery Bancroft made this bribe to Chase Covington out of his own free will. By beyond a reasonable doubt, I mean that there's no other way to explain how this bribe took place than that Avery Bancroft made it out of his own free will. To prove this here to you today, we will be calling upon 3 witnesses. The first witness we will call upon is a bellhop from the Black Bear Casino, Devin Del Sesto. Del Sesto will testify about some of the events that he witnessed leading up to the vote by the Midlands Gambling Commission to issue Avery Bancroft a new casino license. The second witness we will be calling before you today is a linguist named Reese Warren. He will tell you about how undercover detective Mickey Keenan operated his investigation sufficiently to police standards. The third witness we will be calling here for you today is undercover detective Mickey Keenan. He will tell you that he never forced Bancroft to make a bribe to anybody, that Bancroft did in fact make this bribe out of his own free will. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel Jaleesa Harris will ask that you find the defendant guilty.
Thank you, Counselor. Defense?
May I proceed?
Let's get it. All right, feel free.
May it please the court. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, Avery Bancroft committed a bribery. But he is not guilty in this court of law. For he is no king. He is merely a pawn. You might be wondering why we are here. It seems like a pretty open and shut case. The state has brought charges against Mr. Bancroft of bribery, and Mr. Bancroft admits that that bribery did in fact occur. But as you will learn today, in the state of Midlands, someone is not guilty of bribery if they have been entrapped into it by agents of the government. Now there are 2 agents of the government that you need to keep in mind for today's case. The first is Mickey Keenan, an undercover detective for the Midland State Police Department. The second is Corey Hyde, his informant and also Mr. Bancroft's personal assistant. Now these 2 men, entrapped Avery Bancroft into committing the bribe. And they are the kings of today's case. And they made Avery Bancroft their pawn. Now the state just came before you and explained something called a burden of proof. Normally, in any other case, the state would have the full burden of proof, but today we've decided to take on a burden of our own. We're pursuing what's called an affirmative defense of entrapment. This means that we have to prove, by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Avery Bancroft was entrapped. And just because we have taken on a burden of our own does not mean that the state is off the hook. They have to prove that Avery Bancroft had a predisposition to commit this bribery, meaning he would have done this without the interference of the Midland State Police Department. Now to do this, we will call before you 3 witnesses. The first is Avery Bancroft himself. He wants you to hear his side of the story. He will tell you that the idea of a bribe never entered his mind until agents of the government put it there. He will tell you that time and time again, agents of the government introduced the idea of a bribe, but he was reluctant to commit it. And he will tell you finally that he felt like he had no choice to get his proposal through, but to commit a bribe and pay Avery Bancroft. The second witness we will call before you is Miss Corey Hyde. She was an informant of the government and also Mr. Bancroft's assistant. She will tell you that she scheduled all the meetings. She will tell you that she and Keenan planned the sting operation to try and get Mr. Bancroft to commit a bribery. And she will tell you that she repeatedly introduced the topic. Now, you might be wondering why the Midland State Police Department would try and entrap a law-abiding citizen into committing a bribery. To talk about this, we will call before you J.D. Lorian, Chief Auditor of a company that in 2014 audited the Midland State Police Department and found that they failed to properly train their officers to properly investigate, properly avoid entrapment. And even though they've had a year to fix these problems, they still haven't. Because as J.D. evaluated the evidence of this case, he found that they still did not meet the minimum requirements. Now, after all the evidence of today's case has been presented, my co-counsel, Haley Erickson, will come before you
and ask you to find Mr. Bancroft not guilty of bribery by reason of entrapment. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, the prosecution, first witness.
The prosecution would like to call the first witness, Devin Del Sesto.
All right, Mr. Sesto.
For your score, presiding judge. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please state your name, spelling your last for the record.
Hi, my name is Devin Del Sesto, Delsesto.
Please tell members of the jury more about yourself.
Well, at first I tried my hand at this whole college thing, but when I found out that I was more of a party girl and a little less studious, I decided to travel the world through my savings, but ended up at a motivational seminar where I learned that the key to inner peace is through service to others. And that's how I ended up as a bellhop at Mr. Bancroft's Casino, the Black Bear.
What does your job as a bellhop entail?
Well, anything from taking bags up to rooms, living room service, valeting. I can spot bad tippers by their luggage, and I think that's pretty impressive.
Now, you mentioned Avery Bancroft. Who is this?
Mr. Bancroft's my boss, the owner of the Black Bear Casino, and he was petitioning the Gambling Commission for a new casino license.
And how do you know that?
Well, I've heard I've heard him talking about the proposal a few times.
And what did he say?
Well, the first time was the day after Valentine's Day, and I was valeting, and he came to talk to me. And in the middle of our conversation, he stopped, turned away, and I heard him say, hey, thanks for calling me back. I have my proposal, and if you're for sale, I'm willing to pay the price, whatever it is. I just want to get this sorted out.
Do you see Avery Bancroft here today in court?
Yes, right there with the nice checkered tie.
Let the record reflect that the witness is properly identified as the defendant.
The record will reflect.
Now, you mentioned the Gambling Commission. Do you know who's on the board?
Well, Mr. Chase Cummington's on the Gambling Commission. He's in the VIP room all the time.
You said that you heard about the proposal a few times. When was the next time?
It had to be April 13th. And I had just gotten out of work, but we were swamped and there was an order up to room 312. And it was a plate of cheese and a fancy bottle of wine. I thought there might be a tip involved, so I took it up. I was met at the door by Keenan, and inside were Bancroft, Cummington, and Hyde.
Do you know what this meeting was about?
Not particularly, but as I was listening in, I saw that Mr. Cummington had this ratty old briefcase, and motioning into it, he said, I'd also like to do one of these.
Objection, hearsay as to the statements of Chase Covington. These are out-of-court statements being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Okay, and what's your response?
Your Honor, we're not trying to prove the truth of the matter, but rather the subsequent action on Bancroft's part.
Can you present an offer of proof where you're going with this?
Yes, later on, Ms. Del Sesto will go on to say that Bancroft indeed ordered a new briefcase because of what Covington said.
Okay. I'm going to overrule your objection on those grounds, but if opposing counsel is offering it for the truth of the matter asserted and not for those grounds, feel free to renew your objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Could you please repeat what Covington said?
Cummington said, motioning to his old briefcase, I'd also like a new one of these if you catch my drift.
And what happened after that meeting?
Well, I think it was about 2 days later when Bancroft got a package in the mail, and it didn't look like much, but it's my job to screen Bancroft's mail. So I opened it up, and it was a briefcase that looked exactly identical, actually, to the one that Cummington had, but newer, of course.
And what did you do with this package?
Well, I took it off to his office, and it was kind of weird because I didn't see Bancroft with it the next day, but I saw Cummington.
What do you mean?
Well, I had just gotten off work again, and I had just gotten out of work, and I heard some big was in the VIP room, and I thought I might stop by because, tips. And so I saw Mr. Cummington and Mr. Bancroft sitting at the table playing blackjack, I think. and they each had to bring a briefcase by their side.
They both had briefcases. Could you please explain?
Well, Mr. Covington had that nasty old briefcase of his, and Bancroft had the new one that I delivered prior. And it was really strange because after in the lobby, I saw Covington with the briefcase that Bancroft had underneath his table. Well, one identical at least.
Was it the same one in the meeting?
No, the one that he had in the meeting was all raggedy and bent out of shape. The one that he had in the lobby looked exactly like the one that Bancroft had under his head of the table.
And when did this take place?
April 16th. It was the day after, the day before, the Gambling Commission approved for Mr. Bancroft's new casino license.
During this meeting, did you see Officer Keenan around?
Keenan must have left half an hour before I saw Bancroft and Covington together at the blackjack table.
Now, whenever Officer Keenan and Mr. Bancroft were together, did you ever hear Mickey Keenan threaten Mr. Bancroft?
Oh no, I've never even seen a negative interaction between the two.
And when they were together, did you ever see Mickey Keenan force Avery Bancroft to give Mr. Covington money?
No, I've never seen anything like that.
No more questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counsel. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Hello. My name is Bailey Huson. I'll be asking you some questions today. Now, on direct, you mentioned that you overheard a conversation between Mr. Bancroft and someone on the telephone.
I did.
And you have no idea who was on the other side of that telephone.
No.
But if you concluded that this was about the casino proposal,
He used the word proposal.
but it could have been about any other business proposal, correct?
That's possible.
Right. Let's move to April 13th. You delivered a wine and cheese plate to room 312.
I did.
You had no idea what was going on in that room before you got there.
I would have had no way.
And you had no idea what this meeting was about,
No, I was just doing my job.
and you didn't inquire afterwards what this meeting was about.
It's not my job to ask questions.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move to April 16th. You say you got 20 to 30 minutes of sleep.
Yes, but that's the most case most nights. It wasn't the first night that I had only gotten half an hour of sleep. I work a lot.
Okay. And that day you saw Mr. Bancroft and Miss Covington together in the casino,
I did.
in the blackjack room.
Yeah.
And from your position, you were able to see the briefcase.
Briefcases, yes.
You were able to see the briefcase under Mr. Bancroft's chair.
I was supposed to see both of them under each of their chairs.
But we'll go through that. First, you were able to see the briefcase under Mr. Bancroft's chair.
Yes, I was.
And you were also able to see the Bancroft under Miss Covington's chair.
Briefcase, yes.
And you could correctly, you could assume that these were the same briefcases you had seen before?
Well, I had opened it, screened it, and delivered it to him, yes. So I do believe that that was the briefcase.
To be clear, you had only opened and screened Mr. Bancroft's briefcase,
Yes, but I had seen Covington's on multiple occasions.
but the only occasion was that April 13th meeting.
April 13th, when I saw him, yeah.
So that's not multiple occasions.
I saw it the 13th, and then I saw it again in the lobby. Or when he
On the
was sitting
16th.
there on the floor, yes.
On the 16th.
So that's twice.
Right. All right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about your state of mind that day. You said you were stumbling around the casino,
As I am most days, it's a lot of work.
but you, again, were correctly able to identify both of these briefcases.
I was.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked the moment to be excused.
Okay, you're excused. Thank you for your time.
At this time, the state calls Reese Warren to the stand.
Okay, Mr. Warren, please take a stand.
Jay Harris for the state. May I proceed?
May-
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury and spell your last name for the record.
Yes, my name is Reese Warren. Warren is spelled W-A-R-R-E-N.
Mr. Warren, what do you do for a living?
I happen to be the professor and chair of the Department of Linguistics at Midlands State University. I have also worked closely with the Midlands State Police Academy in the past, offering lectures to law enforcement cadets on gathering testimony during covert operations.
What exactly is a linguist?
Linguistics is the study of language and conversation.
So what are some of your responsibilities as a linguist?
I work closely with forensic psychologists in order to determine whether or not conversational strategies used by covert operatives affect the outcome of the conversation, or in simpler terms, how what you say affects the flow of the conversation.
So what kind of education do you have to work in this field?
I received my Bachelor's of Science in Linguistics from University of North Carolina, and I also received my PhD in Linguistics from Georgetown University in our nation's great capital.
What kind of experience do you have in this field?
After receiving my PhD, I have published over 37 articles in linguistics that have passed peer review and have been published in both linguistics and psychology journals. I have also been retained in 23 different cases in which a defendant has alleged entrapment, and I also have a text, How to Talk to Alleged Criminals, which is actually standard text in Midlands State Police Academy.
So Mr. Warren, how exactly would a linguist relate to an undercover case?
What you say in a conversation can have a direct outcome on the other person in the conversation. So if a undercover operative uses coercive techniques during their conversation that can be shown to induce criminal activity within a suspect, that can be cause for some concern. And it's my job to sift through that when I collaborate with the psychologist and determine whether or not that actually occurred.
So how are you involved in today's case?
I was initially retained by the defense to perform some of these analyses in order to determine whether the Midlands State Police Department's actions rose to the level of entrapment. After I performed my analysis, I was told that I would not be testifying for the defendant and that my services would no longer be needed. At that point, the state approached me asking me to testify, and I received $500 in compensation for that.
So to do your analysis, were you supplied with sufficient facts and data for today's case?
Yes, I was supplied with a tape of a March 31st conversation between undercover investigating officer known as Mickey Keenan in today's court for today's case. I was also, on that tape was the voices of Corey Hyde, which is Avery Bancroft's executive assistant, and the Black Bear Casino owner, Avery Bancroft, as well as an email exchange from March 30th between Officer Keenan and Hyde.
Did you use reliable principles and methods to do your analysis in today's case?
Yes, I actually used the best known practices for police investigative testimonial investigations. Those being, there are main 4 steps to those that are generally agreed upon by linguists as the best practices. Those being, start the conversation off by asking open-ended questions so that the target is, or so that the suspect is allowed to implicate themselves. Drop subtle hints of illegal activity without actually mentioning it in hopes that the suspect latches onto those and continues to further incriminate themselves. If the illegal conduct has already happened, you can also ask the suspect to tell a story in order that they, implicate themselves in the already occurred crime. And if all of these fail, you can also ask a clear, unambiguous question about whether or not the suspect is willing to commit the illegal activity.
So did you apply the facts and data that you received reliably to your principles and methods in today's case?
Yes, I use the 4 most widely accepted linguistic analyses, all of which have passed peer review numerous times.
So how did you begin your analysis?
I conducted a transcript analysis of the tape of the conversation, and from that transcript analysis, I discovered that both Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde initiated the conversation by asking open-ended questions such as, "What are you thinking?" or "What kinds of amenities are you thinking?" These kind of questions allow the suspect to implicate themselves without fear of coercion on the officer's part.
Was there anything else that you found when you did your analysis?
Yes, I also examined the transcript and the emails, looking for conversational strategies that undercover investigators will often use that have been shown to induce criminal activity within their suspects. And for my investigation, I focused on the 10 most widely used and 10 most important. Those being interrupting their suspect, using ambiguous language, speaking on behalf of the suspect, altering the tape or altering the transcript, coaching of informants, controlling the flow of conversation, offering up more topics than the suspect, and making sure that the topics steer towards illegal activities, ignoring unwilling responses from the suspect, using ambiguous responses such as mm-hmm, sure, or okay as a yes from the suspect, inaccurately restating their answers, and outright lying to the suspect.
Okay, Mr. Warren, what did you find in relation to these strategies?
When examining these strategies, I found that of the 10 most important strategies, Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde completely avoided most of them. The only exceptions there were 4 exceptions, and all of those were used in a limited scope.
Now, earlier you said that you testified in 23 other cases. Are these strategies usually used?
When I'm testifying on behalf of the defense, all of these strategies are used to an egregious extent. Part of the reason why I'm testifying on behalf of the prosecution today is because these are used in such a limited scope.
Were you able to come to a conclusion based upon a professional degree of certainty?
Absolutely. In regards to the transcripts of the March 31st conversation and the March 30th email exchange, I came to the conclusion that Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde did act within the best known practices for police testimonial investigative techniques.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Counselor. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Now, Dr. Warren, before I begin, I'd just like to clarify something for the court. You said you could make a conclusion based on whether or not Detective Keenan and Ms. Hyde's actions followed best practices, correct?
Yes, in regards to those transcripts.
But you cannot come to a conclusion whether or not Detective Keenan's actions rose to the level of entrapment, can you?
Legally, no.
All right, now I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about how you came to your conclusions in today's case. Now, you mentioned that one way Detective Keenan and Ms. Hyde could violate best practices are by interrupting the target, correct?
That is correct.
Now, this did occur during the conversation.
That
Is that a
correct.
yes?
That is correct.
This occurred when Ms. Hyde interrupted Mr. Bancroft when he was trying to explain to Mr. Keenan why he deserved the casino license, correct?
Yes, that was the instance. That was one of the instances.
And when he did that, Ms. Hyde said that just offering a good casino proposal wasn't enough. She needed to do something to sweeten the pot, didn't she?
That is correct.
Now, next you would agree with me that it is not the best practice of detectives or Ms. Hyde to speak on behalf of Mr. Bancroft during this conversation, correct?
No, that is not. However, that was an instance of providing a subtle hint, which is in line with one of the best practices. So its use was questionable, but not necessarily
But
completely improper.
speaking on behalf of the suspect is not best practice, correct?
Correct.
Now, this did occur during the conversation, didn't it?
Correct.
Now, this occurred when Ms. Hyde asked for Mr. Bancroft, who do we need to make happy, correct?
That would be correct, yes.
And in response to that, Mr. Keenan said, everyone.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, next, another way that Detective Keenan and Ms. Hyde would have failed to follow best practices is if they controlled the topics of conversation, correct?
That is correct.
Now, during the conversation on March 31st, there were a total of 7 topics of conversation introduced, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
3 of these were introduced by Detective Keenan.
That is correct.
1 of these was introduced by Ms. Hyde,
That is correct.
and 3 of them were introduced by Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, that would be correct.
So out of the 7 topics of conversation introduced, Mr. Bancroft introduced less than half of them, correct?
That would be correct.
Now, Dr. Warren, I'd like to talk to you about how coaching came into effect in today's trial. Now, you'd agree with me that if Detective Keenan coached an informant, that would not be following best practices, would it?
No, that is one of the strategies shown to induce criminal activity.
Now, in today's case, Ms. Hyde was Detective Keenan's informant,
That would be correct.
and you found through your analysis of the evidence that Detective Keenan gave Ms. Hyde specific things to say during the conversation with Mr. Bancroft.
Again, that is also correct. You are, I believe, referring to the sweetening the pot and throughout that email exchange, which would be an example of providing a subtle hint for the target to latch onto.
So is that a yes? Detective Keenan provided Ms. Hyde with certain things to say,
Yes, certain topics.
and that would qualify as coaching.
Correct.
Now, during the conversation with Mr. Bancroft, Ms. Hyde said everything that Detective Keenan asked her to say, didn't she?
That would be correct.
And you would say that this is a textbook example of coaching, wouldn't you?
In this regard, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor, I just ask that this witness be excused.
All right, Dr. Warren, thank you for your time. All right, prosecution, next witness.
At this kind of time, the state would like to call Mickey Keenan to the stand.
All right, Mr. Keenan, please take a seat.
Permission to approach
Approach you.
the widow.
You can enter the well check.
Good afternoon, Half Officer Keenan.
Good afternoon.
Please state your name to the court, spelling your last name for the record.
The name's Mickey Keenan, that's K-E-E-N-A-N.
So, Mr. Keenan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I work in the Special Investigations Division of the Midland State Police Department.
What is so special about this Special Investigations Division?
What really separates us from other detectives is the sheer number of cases that we have to go undercover for, really.
What kind of cases would you say that you go undercover for?
Really, it just depends on what kind of case is needed. I've worked human trafficking, crime rings, drug rings, you name it. Sometimes the only way to keep our hometown safe is taking the problem from the inside, you know, and that's why we do it.
Would a man like yourself have to go under a lot of special training to work on these type of cases?
Well, in order to have my job, you have to have a lot of experience under your belt. They don't just give a rookie a gun and an undercover ID.
How many cases would you say that you've worked on while you've been in the Special Investigations Unit?
Oh man, it's probably 10 or 11 by now if you include this Bancroft Covington business.
Bancroft and Covington, who are they?
They were the suspects in my latest case. I've been working at the commission since 2013. Mr. Avery Bancroft, a casino owner, and Mr. Chase Covington, a state gambling commissioner.
Did you identify Mr. Bancroft in this courtroom today?
Yes, he's right over there in the checkered tie.
Let the record reflect that my witness has properly identified Mr. Bancroft.
The record will reflect.
So, what led you to investigate Mr. Bancroft and Mr. Covington?
Well, originally I wasn't focused on either of them at all, but the gambling commission itself. The police department had been getting tips of corruption for quite a while, so I went from the inside to see if I could find any intel on it.
I want to ask you, what led you to investigate Mr. Bancroft and Mr. Covington specifically?
Well, late last year, the gambling commission announced they would be accepting proposals and would vote on who would get a brand new casino. Mr. Covington is a voting member of the commission, so I placed myself on his staff to see if I could find any corruption in the voting process.
Did you find any corruption in the voting process?
I did. That's where Mr. Bancroft comes in.
How does Mr. Bancroft come in at this point?
Well, there was a phone call between Chase Covington and Avery Bancroft, and then an unusual meeting between Chase Covington, Avery Bancroft, Corey Hyde, and myself.
You mentioned 2 instances. I want to take them one at a time. When did the phone call happen?
It was February 13, 2015. I was in Covington's office when Bancroft called Covington.
What did he say?
Well, Covington put it on speakerphone, and Bancroft said, "I saw the announcement about a new proposal, or about a new casino. I'm putting together a proposal, and I'd like to talk to you about it to, grease the wheels," as he put it.
And what happened after that?
Chase's tone changed. He became really harsh, and he hung up the phone before Bancroft could even finish talking.
How did you further your investigation after this?
I recruited some help from Corey Hyde, Avery Bancroft's executive assistant, who was in charge of setting up meetings between Bancroft and everybody else. So that's how I was able to get my way into the meetings.
So I want to go to the meeting on April 13th between yourself, Mr. Bancroft, Mr. Covington, and Mr. Hyde. What happened in that meeting?
Well, Covington and Bancroft began to talk about the proposal as usual. And then Chase started asking questions about money. That's when Bancroft said, "Of course, it's always about the money with you." And then there was a long pause and complete silence.
What happened after that?
I grabbed a napkin and a pen and slipped them to Bancroft. Bancroft then wrote on, and then I repeated Bancroft's own words, "It's always about the money."
Who did What happened then after that?
Bancroft took the napkin and wrote "yes" equals 150K on it and slid it to Covington.
What did Covington then do with that napkin?
Chase looked at it, but slid it right back to Bancroft. That's when Bancroft immediately crossed out the 150K and wrote 250K next to it. Then slid it back to Covington. Covington then swiftly picked it up and placed it in his pocket.
Would you recognize this napkin if I had it here in this courtroom to show to you today?
Yes, sir, I would.
At this time, the prosecution moves to admit prosecution wanted to evidence.
We need a few more steps. Show it to opposing counsel first, and the witness needs to be able to testify to it, so.
Prosecution asks for
Permission to
permission to
approach.
approach
Yeah,
both
go ahead.
counsel. Permission to approach witness.
Yes.
What is that?
This is the napkin Avery Bancroft was writing on in the meeting.
Is that a fair and accurate copy of the napkin?
Affirmative.
So let the record reflect my witness has identified the napkin from the meeting. Prosecution moves to admit it into evidence.
Okay, any objection? Okay, then it'll be entered into evidence.
So what happened after Chase Covington put the napkin in his pocket?
There was then a knock at the door, and Chase became really wide-eyed. An employee by the name of Del Sesto, who testified earlier, was there. Bancroft then reassured him there was no need to be worried because his employees at the Black Bear Casino knew how to be discreet.
When did this meeting take place?
April 13th.
Were you supposed to have any other meetings between Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington?
I was supposed to, but Chase Covington never showed up.
And when was that supposed to happen?
April 16th.
Are you aware of what this trial here is about?
Yes, sir. Bancroft admits to bribing the gambling commissioner, but he's saying that I forced him to make the bribe, but I didn't. I performed my investigation sufficiently.
And how did you perform your investigation sufficiently?
I did my job. No one is perfect. But when it comes to a case like this, Mr. Warren even said, I did most of it right. I asked open-ended questions. I never mentioned a bribe first to Bancroft. When the issue of a bribe did come up, it was Bancroft who initiated the conversation. I only repeated what he said. I did my job correctly. I did not pressure him to make a bribe. Like Ms. Del Sesto said, I wasn't even around when the bribe took place.
Thank you, Officer Keenan. No further questions.
Is there something you would like to do with the document? And you're tendering it to the bench?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's tendered. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Now, Detective Keenan, you started off as a beat cop,
Yeah, I did.
but you didn't like that job.
I mean, you always have to start off somewhere.
But you didn't like it
I guess not really.
Because you're
Not
stuck.
compared to now.
because you were stuck ticketing drunken college students.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's not always fun.
So that's when you asked to be transferred to the Special Investigations Division.
Yes, ma'am.
and you are now a detective within the Special Investigations Division of the Midlands State Police Department.
Yes, ma'am.
So your job here was to catch the big fish,
Yeah, our new chief sent out a mass email to everybody saying that.
and he wanted you to crack down on corruption.
Yes, he did.
He wanted you to be newsworthy.
I mean, if you want to put it that way, yes.
And so, sorry. And he also told you to do whatever it took to get the job done.
I mean, yes. I mean, we have to clean up the streets to keep our hometown safe.
But in that email, he does reference to do whatever it takes to get the job done.
Yeah, yes.
All right, so on, the Midlands Gambling Commission announced on October 1st, 2014, that it would be hearing proposals for a new casino license.
Yes, I did.
And at this point, you were hoping that Mr. Avery Bancroft would apply.
Yeah, I did.
So on the morning of February 13th, 2015, you were in Mr. Covington's office when he received a phone call.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And this phone call was from Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, it was.
And Mr. Bancroft had wanted to discuss his new proposal.
Yes, he said that he wanted to grease the wheels.
And you were hoping that these would be the two big fish that your career really needed.
Well, I was just kind of looking for corruption, and it happened to be that two big fish happened to swim upstream.
So that's when you decided that you would need to infiltrate Mr. Bancroft's business.
Yes, that is right.
And that's when you contacted his executive assistant, Ms. Corey Hyde.
Yes, I did.
So you set a meeting with Ms. Corey Hyde for March 2nd, 2015.
Yes.
And at this meeting, you explained to her that you aren't just an auditor with the Midlands Gambling Commission, but you are actually a detective with the Midlands State Police Department.
Yes, that is what I did.
And you explained to her that you had evidence that would be incriminating that could be used against her of past gambling violations in Vegas.
I did say that.
But you had no such evidence.
No, I didn't, but she's not really on trial today, so.
She is.
Well, she's not bankrupt, if we're not prosecuting.
Right, but so the point being that you lied and manipulated her into working for you.
You could put it that way.
Right, so I would like to talk to you more about the meetings between yourself and Mr. Bancroft. So on March 31st, 2015, you met with Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Corey Hyde.
Yes.
And at this meeting, you were discussing the proposal.
Yes, we were.
But before this meeting, you sent an email to Ms. Corey Hyde to prepare.
I did.
Would you recognize a copy of this meeting, or of this email if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Permission to approach opposing counsel?
Yes.
Permission to approach witness?
You may.
Detective Keenan, what did I just hand you?
The email that I sent Corey Hyde on March 30th.
Does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of this email?
Yes, it does.
At this point, I would like for Exhibit 18 to be entered into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, then it'll be entered.
So in this email, you mentioned to Ms. Corey Hyde that her main goal was to keep the conversation moving in the right direction.
Yes.
And you also mentioned something to her about her suggesting that Mr. Bancroft do something to sweeten the pot.
Yes, I did say that.
And it was very important to you that she be the one to introduce this topic.
I mean, I did say that, yeah,
Why was that?
because I'm an officer of the law.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, as Mr. Moore explained earlier, I cannot say things to lead on to the conversation.
Can you elaborate just a little bit more, clarify a little bit, please?
How so?
Why wouldn't you be allowed to elaborate, or why would you not be allowed to?
Because we'd be entrapment, which is what I did not do.
But as a member of law enforcement, you understand that any informant working on behalf of the government is indeed considered another government agent for the case of entrapment.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. I'd like to move on now to the meeting that occurred on April 13th, 2015. This is when you met with Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Covington and Ms. Hyde, correct?
Yes.
Now, at this meeting, Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Covington were talking about the logistics of the proposal.
They were, yes.
And when the topic of money was introduced, you noticed that Mr. Bancroft seemed a little bit uneasy.
I did, yes.
And this is when you slid a napkin to Mr. Bancroft, a napkin and a pen, correct?
No. Not right after.
Can you explain to me when exactly?
Well, after they were talking about the proposal, Chase Covington started talking about money. That's when Bancroft said that it's always about the money with him. And then there was complete silence. They began to talk a little more, and then I handed him the napkin and pen.
Okay, but regardless, you did slide a napkin to Mr.
Yes, I did.
Bancroft. All right. But Mr. Bancroft just used it to wipe his face,
At first, yes.
and then he continued on just talking about more things with the proposal.
I don't recall. I'm pretty sure that I handed the napkin to him right after.
We'll get there in just a second, but they did talk about the meaning, the proposal a little bit more. And then the topic of money was introduced again.
Hmm?
And then this is when, again, you slid another napkin, a new napkin, to Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, I did.
And that is when you reiterated that it is always about the money.
Yes, and as Mr. Warren explained earlier, that is not a trap.
But it is pushing the subject that it is about the money.
Not when I'm repeating his own words.
All right. So, I'm so sorry. So you would agree that Mr. Bancroft did not initiate the exchange of the napkin at all?
Well, he was the one that started writing on the napkin,
But you slid him the napkin 2 times,
but I
actually.
didn't tell him to write on the napkin.
But you slid it to him with a pen. All right, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, is there anything you'd like to do with that document before you sit down?
Yes, there is. Tender to the bench.
Thank you, Counselor. Any redirect? All
No, I just asked that the witness be excused from the stand.
right, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, anything further from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor, at this time, the state rests its case in chief, and we ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess before the defense starts their case in chief.
Okay, I have almost 2:35, so let's say 2:40. If you guys aren't back, I'm just going to chop your heads off, but 5 minutes?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.